My name is Armin Babajanian. I'm the World Affairs Council. I'm their CEO. And joining me, yeah, you know, fans out there. All the applause to everyone. Joined by my team, Samantha Story, who's actually zooming in from Pennsylvania. She didn't want to miss out. And we also have Rachel Martin. I think she was welcome you all at the bottom of the staircase. And also Mary Ann, thank you for being here as well. We're also joined by board members, including our chair of the board, Peggy Pace. But if all the board members could raise your hands so people know who you are. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank Holocaust Museum right here in San Francisco. Has really worked with us. And Jessica, thank you so much. You're working tirelessly to make sure all the sound and everything sounds really good. So thank you to the museum for hosting and also for all the collaboration, as well as the Jewish Federation and your team, Nammie, for collaborating with us. So we really appreciate that. Finally, I want to thank the panelists for making time for us to be here. You'll soon meet all of them. We have Laura Chesler here. We have Nammie Ichilov. I was trying to get the ch in there, you know. It's not easy. It's one of the few things Armenians and the Jewish people have in common is the ch. And Tomasz Michaldo from the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum in Poland is joining us. Our Master of Ceremonies, Gurwitz, and of course our esteemed moderator, Winslow Swart, who, when the idea was presented to him, he ran with it, and he has made this possible for you all to be here. Thank you, my brother. I really appreciate you. Thank you, Winslow. Finally, we're also grateful to our special guests who also have busy schedules who are here today. Graham Weston is here. Mauro Garza, our District Attorney Joe Gonzalez, Senator Menendez, and Arlene Starr are all here. So thank you for joining us. Yes, please. Round of applause. Last but not least, I do want to thank the World Affairs Council members. Appreciate you all for those of you, many of you are not members. I hope you learned something about the organization today, and one of the board members or myself, and some of my team could also share some of the insights about what we do with the World Affairs Council. We haven't discussed that with you. So we really appreciate you for making time of your afternoon to join us for this program, a very critical part of human history, which is the Holocaust. You know, when I lived in Poland from 2014 to 2016, I made it certain to travel to the city of Auschwitz. Did I say that right?
Perfectly well.
Auschwitz is about an hour west of Krakow, southwestern Poland. And everyone advised me before I went there that the experience was of visiting was going to be one that you couldn't prepare for, nor would you forget it. And that is certainly the case with my experience. And just because we have the museum at Auschwitz-Birkenau, where Tomasz is, and we have the museum here, and a lot of people know about the Holocaust, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to educate people, and not only locally, but globally, about the Holocaust. And this is a gem in our community, so kudos to the donors and funders for the Holocaust Museum for making this happen. And one thing I left out is, after we were done, you're welcome to stay and get a tour. There are different exhibits. There's this room. There's some exhibits to the sides as well. The staff here will be happy to give you a tour. You know, every community or cause or idea has their champion or advocate. We have many of those people right here in this room today. And one person I want to talk about is special because I've known him for a long time. He's a local representative who has a loud voice, but not because it's loud, but because he believes in the truth and he gets things done and speaks for people who are not represented. He's a former city council member. He's a former state representative. He is now a state senator, and he's a champion for our community. Please join me in welcoming Senator Jose Menendez.
What an honor to be Auschwitz. I don't know about you, but every time I sit, I look at images, it's impossible not to become emotional. This is a critical time. We're delving into these lessons of the past to inform the work that still is ongoing and necessary today. I'm so glad we have such an able leader here to guide us, and I'm glad that I get to have the pleasure of introducing my friend and our Master of Ceremonies, Jonathan Gurwitz. And I'm sure everyone in this room knows him, but for those of you who don't, you may not know, and but you don't understand, that Jonathan has a critical eye for history. Someone with deep roots of examining current events and their impact on our community. Columnist and member of the editorial board of the San Antonio was immersed in all things San Antonio, politics, and news. He reported and analyzed the steps and the missteps of local leaders as the city grappled with the challenges of its growth. As Vice President for KGBT Texas, he focuses on messaging of local initiatives that seem to be mundane and have the potential to transform. In addition to his career, Jonathan has made decision. It is a decision to impact our community in ways that don't benefit him personally. His work with Big Brothers Big Sisters, San Antonio Humane Society, San Antonio Mobility Coalition, Jewish Federation of San Antonio, and his work as a board member of the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission. We were just discussing it right before we came in. So all I can say about Jonathan is that he uses his skill, words, intellect, his insights that impact local action, greater good on a global scale. Folks, welcome my friend and yours, Jonathan.
Thank you, Senator. Good leader. Austin, for ways my only leadership on David's blog, or especially for your leadership on SB 1828, the Holocaust Remembrance Day legislation. I want to read, for those of you who aren't familiar with that piece of legislation, I just want to read a small caption from SB 1828. Its intent is to educate students about the Holocaust, inspire the students a sense of responsibility, to recognize and uphold human value, and to prevent future atrocities. The governor shall designate a week to be known as Holocaust Remembrance Week in public schools. Holocaust Remembrance Week shall include age-appropriate instruction as determined by each school district. And instruction should include information about the history of lessons learned from the Holocaust, participation in person or using technology, learning projects about the Holocaust, and the use of materials developed or approved by the Texas Holocaust Genocide. The importance of that legislation and the importance of that study are in the news daily. And I was just learned of an incident that happened in the Deerfield neighborhood just in the last days of the distribution of anti-Semitic literature. So when we hear things that happen in Southlake or in different parts of the state or across the nation, Texas has actually been a leader on this issue of studying the Holocaust and what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be an upstander. Senator, thank you again for your leadership in making Texas a leader on Holocaust study and the study of genocide. You might think that the Holocaust is fully studied. It's one of the best documented crimes, best documented historical events. But through the work of museums like this, the Museum of Washington, the museum at Auschwitz,
researchers like Father Patrick Roy. There is always new information that is being learned about the Holocaust, and most importantly, of giving life to the people who were the victims, whose lives were taken. Just recently, in the last week or two, there were discoveries at Nammie Ichilov of identification of victims and also identification of perpetrators at that Nammie Ichilov. So there is still much to be learned about the Holocaust. There is much that our society can gain from learning about the Holocaust. I want to thank our hosts, the museum, the Jewish Federation, Peggy and Armin, the World Affairs Council, for helping put this together. Thank you all for attending. Now it's my pleasure to invite my friend Winslow Swart, the founder of 1 Million Greens, to get us started. Winslow.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was an honor to work with you next generation, and I really appreciate your leadership in all things. To introduce myself a little bit, I'm the immediate past chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council, and given the privilege of working with many of you on some very key issues. I'm also actually have the recent privilege of being on our District Attorney Joe Gonzalez's community advisory panel, where we get to advance the cause of criminal and social justice through legal means. I do want to welcome and acknowledge my rabbi, who's also with us, Rabbi Ehrenberg-Chesler. Thank you for joining us today in this important conversation. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to talk a little bit about some of their personal connection to the Shoah, to the Holocaust, and why this conversation is so important to them. I'd like to begin with an observation or reflection of my own, and it has to do with Auschwitz, probably one of the most emblematic symbols of the Holocaust. And it conjures up different things for each of us. And many of us have somewhat direct or indirect connections to that dark moment in human history. Personally, I think about my first cousin, Alexander. Alexander was named after my grandfather, who had just previously, 2 years previously, been murdered in Mauthausen, another concentration camp. And Alexander Ben Aryeh Shlomo Halevi was taken to Auschwitz from the home, which was right next door to my mom's home in Amsterdam, taken to Auschwitz in cattle cars. And my first cousin Alexander was barely 2 years old. And what I understand is he was crying. So the Nazis threw him up in the air and caught him on the end of a bayonet. And a few years later, his parents, my aunt and uncle, and I'm going to say their names because we do that, Aryeh Shlomo, Ben Alexander Halevi, and his wife Laura. We lost them. And the question is, how could this possibly happen? How could they, my immediate family, 300 of my own direct relatives, and 6 million of my people, and many million others, have suffered such horrors? And Elie Wiesel said it very clearly. And my previous rabbi, Aryeh Sheinberg, would sometimes quote this, and he would say, of blessed memory, he would say, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And the world was indifferent. And that's why these things occurred. When my mother at 12 years old was marched from her home and put in a cattle car and taken to Bergen-Belsen, which she survived, but my grandmother did not. Again, it was because the world was indifferent. And why I and my colleagues and all of us are here is to not only study and know and remember, that's how we honor them, but also through this education to be that light, which, as my father would say, that we don't tolerate intolerance, and that we challenge directly xenophobia, anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, and discrimination. And so the conversation that I hope to ignite a little bit and listen about is not only our connections and to remember our loved ones, but to take those lessons forward, and how, just as the work that Senator Menendez and several people, Florida and many people in this room, have done to advance social justice through Holocaust education. Our work is obviously not finished. So I would like to ask Tomasz to, in a few moments, just tell us a little bit about their mission and their work. But just before that, with our panelists, to ask Laura, who has a close relationship and does some work in Holocaust education, just speak a little bit about your connection personally, and then maybe some of the work you're doing and why you're here today.
Okay, I'm Laura Chesler, and my dad was a Holocaust survivor, and he was actually one of the original people who had the original idea for having a Holocaust museum in San Antonio, and was instrumental in raising the money for it. And I think it was very important to him because he did feel that if you don't remember and you forget, it's going to happen again. And so this was created to be a center for learning and really created in some way for children so that they would learn and begin to understand the history and enact in their lives or take action in their lives that would prevent this from happening again. I've not recently, but in the past, been very involved with the museum. I chaired the board and was instrumental at the museum for a number of years, and have done other work in the community with organizations such as the National Conference of Christians and Jews, which was eventually named the United Communities of San Antonio. And their mission was to eliminate bias, bigotry, and racism. So just over the years, I have been involved in San Antonio, and it is very important to me and to my family, and I know to everybody here that we continue this kind of work in our community.
Thank you for that. Nammie, I'd like to hear a little bit about your connection to this and global cause.
Thank you, Winslow. Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Nammie Ichilov. Armin, don't get to be 50 plus years old without hearing my name shared in different ways. So please, it's okay. I have the privilege of being the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of San Antonio, which is the umbrella organization for the museum. And in my role, I'm a second generation survivor. Although I don't like to use that phrase because genuinely, I believe everybody sitting here is a survivor of the Holocaust. I don't think you necessarily need to be have a direct line of somebody who was murdered during the Holocaust to be a survivor of this story. So I would like to sort of frame that for everybody. Jonathan mentioned that we happen to be in a time in the last 24, 48, 72 hours where a hate group has made its way to the limits of our city. And I was actually, this was brought to me today, according to this group, the Jews won World War II. That's the kind of thing that was passed around in the neighborhoods. They threw leaflets with little pebbles to throw into people's driveways in our local neighborhoods, Deerfield being one of them, Deer Park, Churchill Estates, neighborhoods where Jews reside and have found a home in the midst of other faith groups, and with the intent of, although not a physical threat, nothing in these documents suggests a physical threat to anybody, but certainly physical threat, meaning that's the differentiator when law enforcement gets involved. But the emotional threat that these flyers cause, the notion that to be a Jew, to wake up, to go pick up the newspaper, or to go to your car and to see something that is so painful, so hurtful, so direct, so aggressive, that is why we have this museum in San Antonio. Because of the legislature and House Bill 1828, we have actually had a significant increase in demand for Holocaust education, which is a wonderful blessing. There's two ways to remember the Holocaust.
There's to remember the Holocaust and to be depressed and sad, and that is a reality of everybody who perished. But today, especially today, on the first anniversary of the passing of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who once said that we shouldn't be depressed if we think about life as a gift. So every day we live, every day we have, is a day to be able to make a difference in the world. The mission of the museum, the sort of the principal purpose of the museum, is to help people become upstanders. To not, to Winslow's point with Elie Wiesel's quote, we don't have the luxury of standing by when evil occurs around us. We have a responsibility to take action, to do something. And for me, being a Jewish communal service professional, having the honor of being the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of San Antonio, I take that role very seriously. And having a gemstone like a Holocaust Museum in San Antonio is something that we should be incredibly proud about. Having the responsibility to educate, pre-COVID, we were seeing approximately 18,000 children a year walking through these doors and being educated. And I do want to recognize our docents who give of their time to provide the tours. And unfortunately, we are living through the end of personal Holocaust survivor stories. This is a tragic time in the story of the Holocaust because people won't be able to hear the first-hand story. People won't be able to hear that personal narrative of our Holocaust survivors. And so it's our responsibility to own those narratives and to make sure those stories continue. That's sort of my story, and I'm sure I'll have other opportunities to answer questions. So thank you, Winslow.
Thank you for that. And your work does make a huge impact. I enjoyed collaborating with you. Thank you for making a difference. We're going to have some comment cards we're going to distribute for you to be able to write some questions that you have that will be brought up to the panel. And so maybe we can do that while we hear from Tomasz in Poland. And Tomasz, you're there at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum. And I'd like to hear a little bit about you and mostly about the mission there and the work that you're doing. So if you could please share that with us today.
First of all, thank you for the invitation, and it's very important for me and also for the museum and for the memorial that I can be here with you today and share a little bit about our mission and about what we are trying to do, we are trying to educate people who are coming to the museum. And first of all, really thank you, Winslow, for raising the issue of indifference, because I think it's a crucial part of our education. As one of the survivors said just 2 years ago during the anniversary of the liberation of the camp on January 27th, Auschwitz did not descend from the skies, which means that Auschwitz was not the first stage of the Holocaust. It was rather its final stage, and it all started with the wars, with the hatred towards the others. But the biggest problem of that times of 1930s and later was in fact the indifference, because if there were people then who stood up and really said out loud that this should be stopped, I'm talking about the Nazi Germany, then Austria, then of course after the outbreak of the war and so on. If there were people who would say no, then maybe it would not lead to this extreme stage, to genocide, to the Holocaust. So it's really I think we do stress this when educating about Auschwitz and the Holocaust. Just to share before I'll tell you more about our educational activities here. You shared your personal connection to Auschwitz or to the Holocaust, and I'm not Jewish, and I've been working here in the museum for 11, 12 years. And frankly speaking, I believe that, in fact, I have no personal connection to this place. And then only about 2 or 3 years ago, I found a document. It was just a coincidence, but I found a document where my name, I mean, my surname also appears. It's very rare in Poland. We are like 50, 60 people in Poland. And it turned out that I have a distant relative. I had a distant relative, in fact, who, as a non-Jewish Pole, was taken to forced labor somewhere in Austria. Then he attempted to escape. He was caught, brought to Auschwitz. And finally, well, the last trace of this man is from the main camp in Auschwitz from September 1943. And then he simply disappeared. I mean, we have no single trace about that man after September 443. So most probably he was also at some point selected as a person who is unable to work, to be a prisoner, to be efficient. And it was frankly speaking, it was a very, very important moment for me, because it added a lot to my commitment to the place. So that's just let's say the personal connection. Now, as for the education, we have the education on like 2 levels. There is the basic level, which are the tours that are given by our guides, our docents. So before the pandemic, we had about 2.3 million visitors in Auschwitz every year, and around 70-75% of them took tours, I mean, of course, guided tours through Auschwitz and Birkenau. And this is around 1.7-1.8 million people from all over the world. And they are, which is, I think, very important, they are both Jewish and non-Jewish. And there are people who have no personal connection to Auschwitz, no personal connection to the Holocaust, who sometimes, believe me, it's maybe very difficult to understand it, but some people hear this story, the story of the Holocaust, for the first time in their lives. And as Armen also said at the very, very beginning, this experience of being here, of being in the authentic space of Auschwitz, is sometimes really a life-changing experience. And this is the education on, let's say, the basic level. But we have also what we call the in-depth education on Auschwitz. So we have programs and for different groups, for students, for soldiers, for teachers, because we also believe that except for that basic education that everyone can get, we should also educate educators, those who would be able to reach or to get with the message of the museum to also to other people, and maybe later bring them to the museum. Of course, the pandemic changed a lot. I mean, the numbers decreased, but still we do see that there is really a huge interest in the story of the Holocaust. And I also want to stress that what is very important for us here in the museum, it's also a very big interest in Poland. I mean, also among students and the teachers who really see it as a very important part of the curriculum in schools. So I think it's a crucial thing to start with students, to start with those who can later, of course, shape our world.
Is
sign up yet for the museum and the camp?
Well, we are working on such a virtual tool and tour. We are working with two big Israeli companies, Apps Flyer and Diskin, who are preparing that tool for us, and we hope that for the next International Holocaust Remembrance Day in January, we'll have it ready. So then I will, of course, everybody would be able, everywhere in the world, in fact, would be able to experience Auschwitz somehow.
We look forward to that. Good news. So I would love to hear some questions that some of you all have for panelists or guests on the topic. And not only as it pertains to the historical elements, but also the educational and how we advance the social, cultural, and educational landscape as a result of these studies and this work.
While those are coming in, I'm going to take point of privilege for a moment. Thomas talked about the conversion, the responsibility of education. I want to give a quick shout out to the museum staff here and to the supporters of the museum in San Antonio, because when COVID hit, that didn't mean that we closed down the museum. We physically closed the doors to the museum here, but we converted in a matter of 2 to 3 months our entire educational program and made it virtual. So that for the last 2 years, our local students, the museum's catchment area is actually from San Antonio all the way down to the Rio Grande Valley. And so we created traveling exhibits. We created additional educational trunks for teachers to be able to take and bring to their classrooms. We shut down our old website and produced a brand new website because the old website simply couldn't take the traffic that was necessary. Our Jewish Texas Holocaust Week, we converted to a virtual week where we had presenters every single day that we aired virtually. So, I'm sure that, our environments are a little bit different, but I am thankful that we were able to make that pivot here locally so that our students would not miss out and our teachers would still have the resources that they need. Because frankly, there's an assumption that Jonathan mentioned that because this event is the most well-documented and event throughout history, the fact is that the majority of the population is actually relatively ignorant of the facts and the information that is connected to the Holocaust. And the crimes of the Holocaust are so extreme that they're beyond the realm of our normal understanding. And so it's very easy for somebody who is not educated to simply not believe the numbers and the data and the information that is connected to the Holocaust. So I just want to give a shout out to everybody connected to our San Antonio Holocaust Memorial Museum, because if not for them, the last 2 years would have simply been a lost 2 years in the Holocaust education across the South Texas area. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay.
So so particularly, Laura's father's name, there's a fund, the Oscar Ehrenberg Foundation for Holocaust Education exists, which was instrumental in providing us many of those resources. So thank you to Laura and obviously the family history.
So I have a couple questions for Tomasz. One of them is, after experiencing a tour at Auschwitz, do you still find that some of them are deniers? And if so, how does the museum address that? If you can address it. But.
Yeah. Just what I experienced last week. I gave a tour for a group of students from the Netherlands, who came with their professor, and we were touring Birkenau. We were already for about 6 hours together there. And then the professor told to me, you know, I was here a few years ago. I was a member of the special commission who examined the gas chambers of Birkenau. And he said to me, you know, and we did not find the core or crucial evidence that the gas chambers in Birkenau were the gas chambers. So, you know, and he told me this just by the gas chambers in Birkenau, in front of the students. And for me, it's of course a direct denial of, you know, you can't just, it's just a really denial. And I just told him that, first of all, I've never heard about any such commission coming and you know, testing the gas chambers or whatever in the recent years. And I told him that for me it's just a denial. And luckily his students were really aware and well educated, I think, before. So they always expressed the feeling that they also think this is just a direct denial. And, you know, frankly speaking, I do not have personally, I do not have many encounters with the deniers, because I mostly work with Israelis and I mostly give tours in Hebrew. So my experience is completely different in fact. But still, they are coming to the museum. Maybe you've heard about the anti-Semitic writings that appeared on the barracks in Birkenau just in 2 or 3 weeks ago. And, you know, we did not publish these photographs. We didn't want them to feel that they won in a way by, you know, by publishing, by showing this. But believe me, what they wrote there was really an awful anti-Semitic. It's even very difficult for me to express it, but it was really something really awful. So frankly speaking, we do not have a way of combating the denial. I mean, it depends on the situation. Now, it's really different when the group that is, for example, I'm talking right now as a guide. If the group supports you in a way, if they say that agree with you as a guide that those deniers say it's not right, but again, a lot depends on the situation.
Thank you for that. One of our audience members recently saw a 60-minute segment, a hologram program that keeps Holocaust survivors' stories alive even after they passed away. You know, I recall Steven Spielberg had archived my mother and several other people in video, and this hologram sounds like a bigger deal in some ways. But the question is, Laura, did your father participate in this archival storytelling to keep this story alive?
He did. He did the Steven Spielberg tapes, and there are copies here, and then of course we have copies. He didn't love talking about it, and so he was very picky or careful about when he would speak, and he really didn't like going to schools with young children because it was too big; they could not understand it. But he did regularly speak at the Kelly Air Force, at all the Air Force bases would invite him, and I think at Fort Sam Houston used to have him come and speak. So he did participate.
Those hologram recordings are fantastic, but they require a tremendous amount of energy on the Holocaust survivor because they require hours and hours of recording of every possible conversation, every possible question. And what ended up happening is, unfortunately, the technology of these, first of all, they're incredibly expensive because of everything that goes into it. but they're holograms that bring the Holocaust survivor into a conversation with whether they're children or visitors, so they can ask any question, and the artificial intelligence takes the recordings of the Holocaust survivor and composes a response. So the reality is that the technology is phenomenal today, but many of our Holocaust survivors aren't capable of that kind of energy requirement. So video recording is still a primary way for us to keep their stories alive.
Okay, so this is another one for Tomasz. And one of our guests has asked, could you comment on the Polish law on the Holocaust, in which assigning responsibility for complicity on the Holocaust is being penalized?
Luckily, the law is, it was just discussed, and luckily it's not already active. But the wave of right-wing movements is going through the whole Europe right now. I mean, I'm referring mostly to Central Europe. So the law was definitely a product and of that wave. And frankly speaking, this bill claimed or said that you cannot say that Poles as a nation, right? Poles as a nation are complicit in a Holocaust, but you can say that the individuals were. So this was the main idea of this law. But as you maybe know, after the discussions with Israel, with United States, the law is not again. Nobody can be really penalized for that right now. But I'm not saying that in the future it won't be discussed again. We just don't know. I mean,
Legislation alone doesn't solve the problems. We have legislation here in the state of Texas that gets twisted and turned and misinterpreted, just like we saw in Carrollton recently, where someone brought up, in terms of having Holocaust education or materials in the library, that they should be able to present the other point of view. What other point of view is there? And so I think we have a lot of work to do, even when we have legislation that supports our work. It's really up to all of us. And so my next kind of question for my panelists is, what can each one of us do to advance the awareness, the knowledge, the levels of tolerance, and be lights to one another?
Well, that is a big, broad brush question. But I would say that San Antonio is a city that people genuinely get along and try to be understanding. We have a fairly diverse population, and yet we have a very low level of hate crimes and violence. And there is a genuine effort with the churches, meaning churches and synagogues of all stripes, to interact with each other and to get along. And then there are a number of organizations, and I would say that if this is something that you think is important, there are a number of organizations, including this museum, that you can get involved with, either on a volunteer capacity or in some other capacity, fundraising and so on, to help support the work. And like I said, I'm sure the United Way has programs, schools have programs. Unfortunately, there is no more United Communities of San Antonio. But there are other organizations, I'm sure, that will rise up and take their place. But it does, you have to be proactive. It doesn't come to you, you have to seek
So I think Laura mentions a lot of the things that I would also echo. You know, it boils down to people and relationships. Everything in life boils down to how we interact with each other and the experiences that we portray. And I think that you know, if there's an opportunity for you to find something that is meaningful or passionate for you, and then to be able to convey that to others and build community and build collaborations and reach out, whether it's Holocaust directly or whether it's to deal with any other passion that you have that promotes human interactions that are positive, that builds community. And, you know,
I'm sorry, but I just wanted to interrupt for just a second to say that I grew up in a home where there was no cause that had to do with human suffering, prejudice, hunger, that my dad did not pick up the ball and run with it. From the Rwandan genocide to the burning of the Black churches in the South, our whole family was engaged and involved with that. So if you can set an example for children, grandchildren, through your own actions, that is what inspired me then as I became an adult to be very involved in the community, because I was really just sort of trying to live up to my dad, which was impossible, but it was just so ingrained in me that you don't watch children starving on TV, do something to help them. So anyway, I'm sorry.
no, please. That's
I forget some of the things.
we're all in this together. You know, I was an educator for 30 years in the school system. That's where I that was the journey that brought me to this destination. And I would always, whether it was talking to the staff and trying to motivate them to be able to carry out their purpose every day, or whether it was for the students to grow into being the potential that they have. At the end of the day, brushing your teeth and you're looking yourself in the mirror, you need to be able to ask yourself, did I make the world a better place today? If the answer is no, then you need to say, tomorrow I'm going to be better. And if the answer was yes, then go have a great night's sleep. You know, that's really the difference. This topic is important. It is something that is very personal. You know, Tomasz, I have to admit, I'm the grandson of a Pole who refused to go back to Poland after the war. Absolutely, you know, we wanted to take him back to be able to personally learn his story. Sorry, but he refused. And my grandmother, she came from, you know, she was raised in the city of Kielce in Poland. And in Kielce, there was more death after the war of the Jews coming back than during the war. So yes, these are personal stories, but we need to simply be better human beings. We need to live up to our potential, and then we will honor those who perished in these kinds of experiences, or whether it's the Rwandan genocides or Somalia, or, you know, we do a patches program at the museum in November, and this year the patches program is highlighting the genocide of, I got emotional for a second, I'm blanking, just to help. The Uyghurs, thank you, I apologize. So we're highlighting the story of the Uyghur genocide. So, you know, come join, be advocates for simply being good people.
I'd like to just also reflect on, you know, informally, many of us, myself included, that have been part of Holocaust education transmission, is the ability to tie it into themes and topics that everyone can relate to and have experienced, all the way from bullying to discrimination and to broader, more comprehensive and global themes. So this is where we can all make very hyper-local impacts that have global resonance. Formerly, when I was JCRC chair, it was, we never had to think about it standing along with our federation when the Black community was being disparaged, or there were miscarriages of social justice, that we took action right away. The Asian community, LGBTQ, Muslim communities, because we know what it's like. We've been the canaries in the mine, so to speak. And so we cannot stand idly by as a people. And we know that many of our friends across faith and color are the same way. And I think this is the kind of community strengthening and messages. And I know years ago we had an event after the graffiti happened in the neighborhood. So I partnered with the Hispanic Chamber, Federation, Catholic Charities, law enforcement and elected officials and the community at large. And we had a community conversation about hate crimes. And really the message was, and this is something that Laura spoke to as well, and the message was, this is not characteristic or emblematic of San Antonio. Because someone sprayed swastikas and the N-word around the neighborhood, that's really not who we are. And none of us tolerate that. And so, these anomalistic individuals that are spreading hate, yes, they should be held accountable. But all of us, I think, can take comfort and some confidence in knowing that this is not our city. And in some ways, I think we are a bit of a model city in the way that we work together and the futures that we're creating for our children and grandchildren. So, I want to just kind of really acknowledge everyone here and so many others for being a big part of that. And I do want to ask Jonathan to do our closing remarks and anything else that we missed.
Thank you, Winslow. Thank you all for attending. I did just want to echo something that Laura said. Her father, Oscar, was a mentor to me, a real role model to me. Certainly inspired many people to get involved in the community. Tomasz, I enjoyed visiting with you the other day. We had a connection. One of my professors in college was Jan Karski, who was a hero of the Holocaust, one of the few heroes of the Holocaust. His story is not well known, but he is a hero of Poland. He's a righteous Gentile. His story deserves to be told. The lessons or the Holocaust and Auschwitz are unique in Jewish history, unique to the Jewish people, but the lessons of the Holocaust and the lessons of Auschwitz are universal. They apply to people of all backgrounds, of all colors, all ethnicities, all faiths. And that's why we study. And not only to say never again, whether it's the Uyghurs or in Bosnia and Herzegovina or in Darfur, but to make our own society better and to treat the stranger more kindly. Over there on that wall, right by Armin, is a letter just behind you. That is a letter from the State Department that my grandfather's relatives who were in Germany in the 1930s were trying to get out, and they had petitioned to come to the United States, passed the letter that denied them entry to the United States through asylum. They ended up in Auschwitz. So how we treat our neighbors, how we treat people, immigrants, people with different colors. As I said when we opened, the lessons are never more relevant than they are today. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to our hosts and to the World Affairs Council for putting this together, and we hope to see you again.